V'tziva Kohen, v'shochad es hatzibur achas. They slaughter one of the birds. Al kli cheres al mayim chayim, into an earthenware vessel. Al mayim chayim, there's water. The water in the vessel is drawn from not a stagnant body of water, but rather from a living wellspring. Mayim chayim. Rashi, al mayim chayim, nosin osam tchilo b'kli. First, you put water in this earthenware vessel. So the blood, as it goes into the water is colored with the blood. And how much water do you put into this earthenware vessel? A revius of water. So we're speaking about, you have the bird that chirps. You have the earthenware vessel, which is earth and mayim chayim. There's a medrash, I haven't seen in many years, I'd look it up this year, that Rabbi Kiva says that the mouth of a person was given to him as to speak. And what is the value of speech? Whatever you're communicating. What is the tongue? The tongue is the vessel with which you draw. You draw the words. Without a tongue, the person can't speak. So you have a wellspring, you have a pail, you draw water from that wellspring. You put it in the well. So the tongue is in the mouth, and the salivary glands under the tongue continually give saliva. That represents the wellspring. There's a stagnant body of water. One is a cistern, the equivalent, it contains water. If it doesn't rain, it dries up. A wellspring continuously, because the underground springs continuously generates new water. This person went and he took the tongue, and he drew, what did he draw out of this well? The words that came out of this well it was polluted water. It was water that was actually brought about tremendous level of detriment and destruction. So it has to be corrected. The human being is made of earth. That's the earthenware vessel. Kli cheres. The human being was the kli cheres, was endowed with the power of speech. So you have to create a setting which is the equivalent of the person, which you take the earthenware vessel, you put water from a living wellspring, which corresponds to the salivary glands, and the bird which chirps, which speaks, which represents speech, and as a result of this brings about the correction. When the person recovers, because he realizes what he had done wrong, and that's why he recovers only through tefillah and tshuva, and therefore now is the reinstatement process, which is the bird, the water in the earthenware vessel, and now you take, as we'll see in a moment, the acacia wood or the cedar wood, which represents majesty, which is the basis for the gaiva, for the arrogance that he feels he has a right to say anything he chooses, and the crimson cloth and the hyssop grass, which represents shiflus, humility. And together, you sprinkle it on the person, as we'll see in a moment. As atzibur achai yikach oso, you take the living bird. Ves eitzo erez v'shnei toloas ves ezov v'tova osam, and you dip them. Veis atzibur achayo v'dam atzibur ashchuta alamayim, into the blood of the shchuta of the slaughtered bird, which is on the water, achayim. Rashi, he doesn't bind the bird, the living bird, together with the cedar wood and the cloth and the hyssop grass. But the wood and the azov, that's the hyssop grass, kruchem yachad b'loshen zuris, they're wrapped together with the crimson cloth. you wrap them together. It's one taking. Maybe just as the bird is not part of the bunch, the bundle. Maybe you don't dip the bird in the water. Not only they dip those that are bound together, but even the bird is dipped. So the bird is included in the immersion in the water. It's interesting, when you bring a bird as a korban, one doesn't do shchita, right? One only does shchita on a behemah, shor kesef v'seh, the ox, the sheep, and the goat. When you bring a korban, you do malika. This bird over here, we're talking about you do shchita. As you slaughter the animal, you slaughter the bird. And all the criteria of shchita that you must have by an animal, you have to meet those same standards regarding a bird. Because again, this is not a korban. By a korban, one has to do malika. As the Gemara says, is begufa shel kohen. The body of the kohen, actually, the nail of his right thumbnail pierces through the back of the neck, and that's how the bird is killed. And the Gemara says in Zvochim that the meat of the bird that you bring when you bring with it, Ola Sof, Chata Sof is Nevela. It's Nevela, but nevertheless, because it's in the context of Korban, of Chatos, the Kohen eats it. But here, this is Shchuta. This is slaughtered. So if one would eat this bird, the bird itself, one's not eating the Vela. But nevertheless, again, it's not meant to be eaten. It's meant only for this purification, for this reinstatement process. One second. Es a tzipor achayika chosav es eitzo eres v'shnei tolas v'seizov v'tova osam es a tzipor b'dam tzipor shchut l'mayim chayim v'hiz ala mitar ben atzaras sheva pomim, and you sprinkle on the person who you're purifying 7 times. V'tiaro, and he's purified. V'shilach es a tzipor achayo al pnei asoder, and the remaining bird, the bird that was not killed, you send it into the wild. So via the Balaturim, Vizal mitar min atzar sheva pomim. Why 7 times? Keneged shiva dvorim shenigoim bo malayim. Quotes the Gemara in Erchin that tzaras comes for one of 7 reasons. Maza olav sheva pomim. That's the reason why 7 times. It corresponds to the 7 reasons why. V'shil chatzat tzipor. It's alluding that the tzaras will remove itself from the person. The tzipor achashchuta loma kein lo tova o tzaras, and you kill one of the birds. I mean, one bird, it's no longer going to be. Achas mishulachas loma shem Yosef lohara tachza tzaras kamo tzipor hashlucha, meaning the bird that's been killed is not coming back. The bird that you send out, at this moment, it's out in the wild, but that bird could always return. It's a message to the one who spoke Lashon Hara that right now, because he did tshuva and he prayed for healing, he was reinstated. But he has to understand it's always possible to come back. That if he repeats the past behavior, he can become a leper again. Don't think once you're scot-free, it's not happening again. It can happen again. No, it's not. I paid my due, so to say. There's no such thing. You repeat that behavior, you could be right back there. You become a repeated offender. So over here, there's a midrash mentions it's a mission in Sanhedrin. Arba Hediotos Bilom V'Doeg V'Achitov Gechazi. These four individuals, they had ordinary status. Bilam, that was the prophet of the nations. Doeg was the time of Shaul. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. Achitofel, he was the advisor who advised Avshalom how exactly he should kill David when David was a fugitive. The Gechazi. Gechazi was we just read about last week's Parsha. He was the assistant of Elisha. And the whole story with Naaman, he was the Assyrian general who was a leper. And originally he wanted to give tremendous wealth to Elisha for healing him. And he did not take it, but the Gehazi, he took the wealth. And when Elisha found out that he took the wealth, he decreed on him and his family, they should all become lepers. That's Gehazi. Tamotzi shalom medibur PM. Nidchu chafu legenim. Because they had spoken inappropriately, they were pushed into Gehenna. They were thrown into Gehenna. It doesn't say they were subject, they were pushed into Gehenna. The Chofetz Chaim, in one location in the Shemar Shaloshin, he cites a medrash that when a person is put to Gehenna, it's like a person's about to be thrown into a pit, a snake pit. What does he do? He resists. And he pulls away and he doesn't want to go in. So what do they have to do? They have to throw him into the snake pit. Identically, when a person is confronted and he realizes what he's culpable for, he doesn't walk into Gehenna. They have to actually push him into Gehenna because there's such a level of resistance, he's pushed. So these people are nidchafu legehenim, bilam, ayidei l'shon nidchafu legehenim. As a result, when he had spoken inappropriately, he shenemar min arom yantcheni bodok melch Moav. Min haromim arom. He says, from the exalted ones, he see b'mechitzas avos. He says, initially he was a prophet. He was within the classification of the avos. Hinchani Bolok is Urchani Legenim. Bolok, who commissioned him to curse the Jews, because of that, therefore, he was subject to Gehenim. Ve'ech yantcheni el loshen Gehenim. Yantcheni is an expression of She'nemar ben Odom Nehei Chen Doeg. Now, this is important. Doeg was a Jew. He was the head of the Sanhedrin time of Shaul. Al Shona Nitrad. A Mosai. V'shosha Borach David Lenovir Lachimelech HaKoyin B'Kiblo. David and his men, they were fugitives. Shaul was out, wanted to kill him, and he was starving to death. And he fled to Novir Kohanim. Achimelech was the Kohen Gadol, and he agreed to help him. Shaul, V'kinis Kol Avod V'Amalehem. And he gathered all his subjects into Shaul, and he said to them, Yova Tem Osim. Are you behaving appropriately? David Oseh, Mashu Mevakesh. David behaves like he's ruling the roost. And nobody's sharing with me where he is. David has free reign of Eretz Yisrael, and I have no idea where he is. And nobody's sharing with me that information. Nobody's is sick, feels my pain, and you're not sharing with me this information. Hischil Doeg l'sapel lashon hara. Doeg began to speak in lashon hara. Shenemar vayan Doeg hadomi. Doeg hadomi. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, why was he called hadomi? Because although he was a young man, he was in his 30s. He caused the elders of the Sanhedrin to blush due to his genius versus theirs. He totally overwhelmed them with his genius. They were ashamed to be in his presence. But he was a Jew. He wasn't an Edomite. Adomi. Who nitzav al avdi shol v'yomer isis ben Yishai bo'nove elachimelech ben Achitov. He shared with Shaul that David was being harbored by Achimelech, who's the Kohen Gadol, and this is Novir Kohanim. Val yodu nergu chamishu shmonu Kohanim no se'efud bo. And as a result of Doeg sharing this information, 85 Kohanim who were qualified to be the Kohen Gadol were murdered. V'Achimelech Kohen Gadol, in addition to Achimelech, who's the Kohen Gadol, there's no Vir Kohanim Hiko Levi Chorev. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that when Shaul gave the order, they should slaughter all the Kohanim in Nov, which was known Nov, the city of Kohanim. He summons his general, and his general says, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to kill innocent people. Doeg Adomi had such hate for David, because Doeg, as much as of a genius he was, and he was there to Sanhedrin, there were times where he would make a mistake. David, because of his tzidkus, he was always, Mor Alocha, was always correct. Whenever he gave a halach ruling, David never made a mistake, never ever had to retract. So therefore, David's existence to Doeg was literally an embarrassment. So in the worst way, he wanted to remove David from existence. And because of this envy that he had for David, that's why he divulged his location. And ultimately, he himself went, took a sword, killed every one of the Kohanim. Now, listen to this. The Jewish people are called Rachmanim. Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim. We are merciful, who descend from merciful people. If Shaul could give such an order to kill these innocent people because they horrid David, which is so extreme, so this person who is classified as the Rachman, he's acting within the context of extreme cruelty. Omer Abelazar koshen nase Rachman al Achzorim, l'sof nase Achzor al Rachmanim. The one who was a Rachman on Achzorim. Now, Gog initially, Shmuel told Shaul to annihilate Amalek. What happened? He killed Amalek, but he did not kill the king. Why didn't he kill the king? Agag. He had mercy on him. So on who did he have mercy? When Shmuel killed Agag, before he killed him, he made a statement who Agag was and what he represented. A level of inhumanity not to be described. That's how Shmuel identified Agag and what he represents. And then he cut him into 4 pieces. Shmuel HaNavi. So when Shaul had Rachmanis on this monster, who did he have Rachmanis on? On the Achzorim. A person who's a Rachman on Achzorim, ultimately, it says, Koshna Rachman Achzorim, the Sof Nasa Achzor al Rachmanim. Ultimately, he will be an Achzor, who will be cruel to those who he should be merciful to. Ksiv. Vayachmo Shaul al Agag. V'almeitav atzon v'aboker. Shaul had mercy on Agag and the best of the sheep and the cattle. Uchsiv no vir kohanim, ves no vir kohanim hiko lefi chorev. He wiped them out, killed everyone with a sword. It was with a vengeance. I mean, how to do such a thing? The Jews, they're the most special Jews because they harbored David. What does that mean? If you allow your emotion to take over your life and your emotion dictates your behavior, so if you're Rachman on the Achzorim, if you could be a Rachman on Gog who personifies the evil of Amalek, and you allow your emotion to blind you, because how could you even consider sparing this man? That means if your emotion dictates, you could take a Rachman, the city of Kohanim. This is the elite of the Jewish people, because they harbored David, and because your disdain for David, you take these people and you murder them, have them all wiped out. So you become an Achzor and Rachmanim. You become cruel for those who you should be merciful to. Because a person who allows his emotion to dictate, you never know where that could take you. It take you in every level, every direction. We should not be on either side of the equation. When you should behave like an Achzor to Amalek, you behave like a Rachman. And when you should behave like a Rachman to your fellow Jew, especially the most special, because of your conflicts and your disdain for David, you wipe out the whole community. And because of that, that's why Shaul and his children were killed in the Battle of Plishtim, because of what he had done over here with Novir Kohanim, because he had them killed. The Gechazi, al Lashon and Nitrat Vitztareya, because of what he had said. The Shoshin, Vitztareya Naaman, this is the last week's Haftorah we just read. When Naaman, who was the Assyrian general, when he was a leper of Nitzrapo, al Yidei Elisha Novi, and he was healed, when Elisha told him to immerse himself in the river, in the Yarden 7 times, and when he came out, he was relieved of the leprosy. He gathered silver, gold, and all kinds of gifts he wanted to send to Elisha out of appreciation. Lo rotza lekabel olov, and he would not take the gifts. Gerzi was his shamus. He was his attendant. He saw the silver, the gold, and all these ornate clothing. Harami Azebi Kachs Vyodo as a Shahivi Chai Hashem Ki Mratzti Achra V'Lokachti B'Tibumo. He says, I will take it. B'Vadi Muma Lokach. What he took was to his detriment. That caused this blemish, caused him to become a leper. Shenemar Vetzoras Naman Tidbak B'Chol B'Zar Chol. He cursed him. Elisha cursed Gechazi. He says, this leprosy will be part of you and your children forever. And immediately, when Elisha said this, Gechazi became a leper. You're not permitted to take any of that. That's been ostracized. Over the Avodah Zorah. The king of Aroma and Naaman, they were, which was his leading general, they were idolaters. Omer Pedos, Bris Krusel HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Olam. There's a comment that Hashem has with existence. Kol Mishim Sapad Lashon Ra Yilku B'Tzaras. First 6 Lashon Hara, he's meant to be smitten with leprosy. Minayin. This is the law of Metzora. Al Tikre HaMetzora. It should not be Metzora. Elo HaMotzi Shem Ra. The word Metzora, what it represents, is a person who usually Motzi Shem is slander. The person who speaks negatively about another person. It's Lashon which one articulates from his mouth. Don't allow your mouth to diminish your flesh. The mouth is the cause of the diminishment of the flesh. And don't say to the Malach, it was inadvertent. Every person, wherever we go throughout our life, there's a Malach accompanies us, and he records every aspect of our behavior. Every word we say, every action, everything is recorded. And after 120 years, when you come to the Bezdin Shel Ma'ala, that recording is replayed, and every nuance of our behavior throughout our life is presented at that final court case. Whether we say good or we say bad, everything goes on the record. So there, that pasuk is a pasuk Malachi is speaking in the positive. Something which is negative. How do we know the negative is also recorded in that ledger? Okay, so he speaks at length here. The Medrash cites a pasuk of Mishlei. Shlomo says, "Movis v'chaim b'yad halosho." Death and life is dependent on the tongue. Hakol toli b'losh zocha l'chaim. If you utilize the power of speech in a meritorious context, that brings life. Nischayev l'movis. If you speak inappropriately, then brings death. Osek odom b'Torah b'lishono. A person who studies Torah with his mouth, as we said, the words should be articulated. Zocha l'chaim. Shad Torah eitz chaim. Shenema eitz chaim hi lamad zikim bo. It's a tree of life, those who take hold of it. V'hirufu also shaloshon hara. And that heals. That heals whatever lashon hara damage. This is the therapy for that lashon hara. Shenema marpe lashon eitz chaim. The mosek odam b'lashon hara. A person engages in lashon hara. Mischai ben nafshu l'movis. Ultimately, he deserves to be put to death. She'ekoshe lashon hara b'shvichas domim. He says lashon hara has a certain characteristic. It's worse than taking a person's life. Why? Person, God forbid, commits murder. He takes the life of that one person. Person seeks lashon hara horeg shlosha. The three victims. Ha'omro, the one who speaks it, he's going to be victimized. Hamakablo, the one who listens to it. Vanemerolov, and the one who they speak about. Shrei doeg omer lashon hara al Achimelech ben Achitov. V'nerak, the era of Kohanim, they were murdered. Shenemar v'yom Melech nerak Shol, and Shol was killed because of this. Shenemar v'yom Shol b'malo Hashemo b'Hashem, because that's why he was killed in the battle of the Philistines. Chei Omer. Kategori shel novir kohanim. The prosecution of near, that's why Shaul was killed. The dog nishtorish b'chayil b'mazer u'mechalim abo, and Doeg was uprooted from the world to come and the physical world. Shalem argan, yeah. Folks supposed to kill him, and he speaks about how serious lashon hara is. Rambam says that we have different categories of sin. Yeah, bein odom lamokom, between man and God, and bein odom chavero. If a person steals, God forbid, and so when you steal, a person is in violation of two levels of transgression. It's bein odom lamokom. God says you shouldn't steal, and the person went against the will of God. And it's bein odom chavero. You victimized an individual. God will not forgive you, even if you tshuva, unless first you correct what you had done to your fellow. So first you have to return the stolen item. And after you return the stolen item, then God says, then you come speak to me. Then we'll straighten out the record. Until you work it out with your fellow, I don't want to hear about you. So the Chofetz Chaim writes, when you speak lashon hara, it's bein odom l'chaver and bein odom lamokom. Unless you first ask forgiveness of that person, unless he forgives you, you could do tshuva from today forever. You're not forgiven. The blemish of that lashon hara remains with you. You cannot be relieved of it. You cannot be rehabilitated. So Chofetz Chaim writes that a person speaks lashon hara, you have to go over to the person and say to him, by the way, I said something about you. So first he says people who are really totally loose in this area, not cognizant. People don't even remember who they spoke about. So do you even remember who to go over to ask forgiveness from? You don't. And even if you do, you're embarrassed. A person says, by the way, inadvertently or whatever, I damaged your property of this. You say to a person, I spoke behind your back. I said something not appropriate about you. So the person says, what did you say? Do you want to put yourself in that situation that you should be put to the wall and say, what did you say? So very often the person shies away from this. But it's so crucial, so fundamental that the only way you can do tshuva, the person you spoke with has to release you. He has to forgive you. And therefore the Chofetz Chaim writes, therefore it's so important if you're concerned about your neshama to really study these laws and be careful. And hopefully those people who you spoke will forgive you. So that's the beauty, we have a tefillah on Yom Kippur before Kol Nidri. It's called Tefillah Zaka. It's printed in the Machzor. Tefillah Zaka was authored by the author of the Chayodom. Chayodom was initially a halachic sefer, similar to the Mishnah Berurah, but much more concise and condensed. And he writes over there, and he's the author of that tefillah. In the tefillah of Zaka, we say that whoever sinned against us, I forgive. I forgive. As a result of that, if people say that, even people spoke Lashon Hara about them, when you enter into Yom Kippur, all you have to deal with is Beinom Lamakum, between yourself and God. But again, you say that too, but if it's something which the person still has to, let's say somebody stole something from you, and he has a stolen object, that person, you're not forgiving. You want that object back. But anything else, if there's no reason not to forgive him, I forgive him. As a result of that, when we enter Yom Kippur, now all the channels are open that if we do the right thing, we'll be fully reinstated through tshuva. This is what's stated in Tefillah Zakos. As a result of that, the concern that we have with the Chofetz Chaim, that it's Beinod Lachavero, you're not released unless he forgive you, through the Tefillah Zakah, hopefully people say it, and if they say it, you'll be released. I remember this story goes back many years ago. I'd say it's 65 years ago. Maybe less, 60 years ago. My Mashgiach Shechaniv Rocha, it was before Yom Kippur, and he said in the yeshiva then, it's not a yeshiva that, like we have numbers today, maybe 180 students in the yeshiva. And he said, everybody should make a declaration. I forgive anyone who sinned against me. That's what he said. And all the Bochrim made that statement. We forgive everyone, anything, Beinam L'Chavero. Whether you offended a person, whether you damaged a person, whatever it is, we forgive everyone. As a result of now, we go into Yom Kippur, now we just have to do tshuva, it's Beinam L'Mokom, and therefore, we have the opportunity to be fully reinstated through the tshuva. But he writes to Chofetz Chaim, what about if a person went and spoke about a family, not only in a person, he could forgive you. What about you went and spoke negatively about a family? He said the family, a bunch of criminals, crooks, liars, and he comes from a long line of such people. So not only did he speak about the person, he spoke about people who are no longer alive. Or other people, I mean, he touched multiple peoples. Or people speak about communities. You know, if you come from that community, they're a bunch of misers. They're a bunch of who knows what's. So who are you going to speak to? How are you going to be forgiven? The person has a serious problem. And people are very loose, and they don't think when they speak. And sometimes you make a statement, and the statement is a very damaging statement because you spoke negatively about whatever. But again, the Chofetz Chaim writes, what about if I want to speak Lashon Hara to someone? And I do. And the person, when I say, says, I don't want to hear about it. Although I verbalized it. Since it immediately was rejected and never had a chance to put that other person or the group of people in a negative light, it's only being Odom Lamokum, it's not being Odom L'Chavero. All you have to do is now only do tshuva. Because since the other person was not affected at all because it was rejected immediately, you said something you shouldn't have said, but it did not affect your fellow. Therefore, you do not have to ask forgiveness from that particular person. In the basement of Chaim, where they would actually dismember the korbanos, so there was blood and fat and whatever else was there, you never saw a fly. Flies are always associated with sin. If something's totally pure, flies will not be associated. So a person's truly a tzaddik, flies will not be within his proximity. So this we talk about now in the early 50s, late 40s. He was mashgiach in Kfar Chassidim. In that area, there were still swamps, and they had, today we don't see it, but they had what they were called horse flies. These large flies at a certain season, and they could take an ounce of flesh out of you when they would bite you. And Rebbe Lapian and the students, they'd have to walk during the season totally covered, and they'd have to carry like a swatter, a towel, to swat away these horseflies, not to get bitten. Rebbe Lapian used to walk, no fly went near him. And the Rosh Yeshiva, his name was Rav Mishkovsky. In those years, the students never picked up on it. But Rav Mishkovsky, he of course, he knew it. He knew he was a holy man. And he pointed out to the Bocher, to the students, did you ever notice when Rabbi Eli Lapia walks from his home to the yeshiva, although you have all these flies, they don't go near him. But you realize who he is. That's confirmation. He's a holy man. The flies don't go near him. So he went, when he heard that word got out, he went from that moment on with a towel, and would walk from his home to the Beit Medrash. He would move the towel back and forth to pretend he's like swatting away the flies. That nobody should think he's such a holy man. This is the story about him. So what happened? A certain student comes to him and asks him forgiveness. So he says, why are you asking me forgiveness? He says, because I spoke Lashon Hara about you. I said something which is inappropriate about you. He says, could you tell me what you said? The Bacher was totally embarrassed. And he turned all colors. So he says, I prefer not to. So Rebbe Eliyahu says, if you want me to forgive you, I want to hear what you said about me. He had no choice. And when he said what he said, Rebbe Eliyahu was like shocked. I mean, how could he say something which has no relevance to him and to speak something so negative? And literally, it was like a character assassination to that degree. How do you say it? Rebbe Eliyahu says, at this point, I can't forgive you. Come back in a week. Come back in a week. Came back a week later. The student is trembling, and he says, I forgive you with my full heart. So he says to the boy, to the young man, he says, why did I tell you to come back in a week? Because initially, when you told me what you had said, and if I would have said I would have forgiven you, it wouldn't have been with my full heart. It would have been almost like lip service. And I really wouldn't have meant what I felt, because I was hurt so by you. After reflecting on it for a week, I'm letting it go. It's okay. I fully forgive you with my full heart, because I want you to be the full beneficiary of the forgiveness. That's what Rebbe Eliyahu said to the student. Mark, maybe that's where you're coming from. And once said over that story. So just make the declaration. Maybe, it's almost like words. It's lip service. But firstly, you can differentiate between the two cases. When you feel the pain to say, I forgive, if you don't fully feel with your heart, it has value, but doesn't have that total value. But here, we're talking about, nobody knows what anybody said about anybody else. I give you the release. I give you the release. Once you're released, now you only have to deal with between you and Hashem. When you feel the pain, it's a whole different story. But at this moment, not knowing, I could let it go. It's cited in Halacha that if a person is judged negatively because somebody else wasn't willing to let go what he should have let go, he himself has a degree of culpability. So what do you have to gain? Somebody offended you, and he's not going to be a repeated offender. If he's going to be a repeated offender, you have no obligation to forgive him. But if he's not going to be a repeated offender, let it go. What do you have to gain by not forgiving him? If he's going to be held accountable and culpable, it's because you didn't let him release him. So therefore, you're part of the problem. Because does God want to punish his children? God doesn't want to punish his children. But he can only forgive them, rehabilitate them, if the other person is willing to give him the release. So why is God in pain, not able to rehabilitate his child? Because this person didn't want to let go. As a result of that, he contributes to God's pain. Therefore, there's a degree of liability for the person who should have forgiven, who did not forgive. Therefore, the right thing is just let it go.